A metronome. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Talking Books, as you can hear from a very busy Hay Festival. Founded in 1987 around a kitchen table in Wales, Hay has been bringing readers, writers and thinkers together for 30 years, and it's evolved into a global celebration of literature, culture and science. Today I'm delighted to welcome Sebastian Barry, who's the only novelist to win the Costa Book of the Year award twice. He's one of Ireland's finest authors, whose fiction often has its roots in stories passed down through his own family. His latest novel, Days Without End, is set in America in the mid-19th century. So, Sebastian Barry, given so much of your fiction is rooted in your own family history, it seems entirely appropriate to start in your childhood. You couldn't read or write until you were 9.
Well, let's say,
why were you such a slow...
8.
Okay, 8, I beg your pardon. Why were you such a slow starter?
I think I came out of the starting blocks at great speed, but the speed wasn't anything to do with reading or writing. It was to do with loving my family. I was so busy, I think, for those 8 years, worshipping them and adoring them, that I didn't think I needed to go on to the dark arts of writing and reading. They were in themselves books, and indeed I have spent the following 50 years trying to prove that to myself. I think I understood language not as this rather recent technique of something written down, but like in those Rowlandson cartoons of the 18th century, where you saw there's the ticker tape and the talk is in the tape. It seems like something visible to me. And not only that, but the particular phrases and cornucopia of memory of individual members of my family, like my great-aunt Annie, for me, represented her. It was an alternative version of her. And because of that, when the day comes, inevitably, with the older people in the generations ahead of you die, you can bring them with you in this kit form of floating language. And I think in those 8 years, my whole work as a novelist at the age of 6, 7 and 8 was to learn the university of that and not worry about anything else. And I have to say, all credit to my mother and father, they didn't bat an eyelid. Maybe they weren't paying a huge amount of attention, so that's good. But no one ever mentioned dyslexia or anything like that. When I went back to Ireland, I suddenly learned to read.
Well, God intervened, didn't he?
God, that Catholic Irish God, which of course is a very pagan God, actually. In Irish schools, I went to an LCC school in London. I don't know if anyone here went to such a school. They don't think they exist anymore. And for some reason, I hope it wasn't something as blatant as because I was a poor Irish child I couldn't learn to read in England. That would be too horribly historically apt. But anyway, when we went back, they presented me at school in this frightening school, I have to say, because I had now had an English accent. I was talking like that, you know. If you want to get beaten half to death in an Irish schoolyard, go and try that accent on. So I was learning, actually, to be Irish again, which is a very strange experience for a child, because I was Irish. But they also had this mysterious book, and my parents were profound agnostics, and this little book was the Irish Catechism. I don't know if they even do it anymore. It was a thing they gave you, and it was very useful because it said, who made the world? And God made the world. And even I, with my inability to understand language, could connect that little word, God, with the sound that I knew already. And in that way, in the marriage of the sounds that I knew and the words that I was being pointed at, I learned to read. As regards music, if I couldn't read or write, I could sing as a little boy. I'm one of those children who led the procession at Lourdes, singing the Ave Maria, and everyone around me weeping. I mean, what could be nicer than that? And you know, when people sometimes say, I did like your book, I was so upset, I'm thinking, great. You were crying, yes. Brilliant. Yeah.
At what point then did you I was going to say decide to be a writer, but I suppose perhaps it would be better to ask you conceive of yourself as a writer, right from the beginning, perhaps.
Well, my mother, while not paying attention to a lot of things, because she was a very great actress and was very busy, and in those days, in the Abbey, you would rehearse in the afternoon and then do the evening show. So
this is the Abbey Theatre
in Dublin, so you were rarely at home because it was repertory theatre. But in a few moments she had to be with me as a child. At one stage, and I don't remember it because I think I was 9 months old, she said that she put a pencil in my hand and she said, well, there you go, Sebastian, you can write or draw with that as you please. And this was her instruction. So in a tragic sort of way, it's a rather upsetting way, I've only really done what my mother told me to do. Which isn't good.
Now, your latest novel, Days Without End, was inspired in part by a story that your grandfather told you in bed when you were a boy. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, now you're talking about books. Yes. My grandfather actually, Jack O'Hara was his name, he actually had a big ledger. And in this ledger, you know, I think probably something to do with his years in Africa, I don't know what it was, he was always going to write his memoirs. But unfortunately for him, the way he wished to remember his life was just not how it happened. So we were in this very drafty, cold Victorian mansion in outside Dublin in Monkstown. It was the time of the oil strike. You're far too young to remember this. And you couldn't heat any of the houses because the oil was too dear. So naturally we were getting to bed together. So it's my grandfather, and myself in the bed. And if he couldn't write down his life, I was content with the totally invented version of his life that he'd like to tell me in bed. And I beg you, remember these grandparents who are the most important things actually in a child's childhood. For me anyway, and it was the saviour of my childhood. And those lovely moments as a child when you feel a certain aroma, aura of Irish history as he lets rip a fart in the bed and he says, keep the heat in. Which is very important in that terrible winter when there was an oil strike. And would tell me the most incredible things. And in another part of the house, probably in daylight, my mother would be whispering in my ear the actual things that had happened.
Oh.
So I got this wonderful double narrative of the same thing. I can see now that I'm still negotiating between those two versions and delighting in the fact that they contradict each other. My grandfather had a great desire to be considered a gentleman, but he wasn't a gentleman. His father was a working-class man from Sligo. But, you know, that's not going to stop him inventing himself as a gentleman. So when the war came, he was an engineer and he got a commission in the Royal Engineers. And that was because he felt he wanted to have status in the world. So it wasn't such a great reason. But what did he do then? He did bomb disposal. And he was brilliant at it. And he'd had 2 medals for 2 tours of duty in the south of England, defusing bombs during the Second World War. So, forgive me for saying this, but when your beautiful queen came over to us in Ireland, I had so much to tell her about this grandfather, and I knew it would be awfully wicked if I did. But I wanted to say to her, wasn't that a lovely job for an Irishman, defusing bombs in England? But I didn't, I didn't say it. I'm sure she would have laughed. But my other grandfather was an incredible, it was a nationalist and had been out in 1916. And I remember a beautiful moment outside that grandfather's gate when my army grandfather, let's call him that, came to collect me. And they shook hands. They'd never met before that or after that. And I thought that was a very important handshake in Irish history, actually.
So he sparked